All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is the beginning of the 2015 honors thesis presentations in anthropology at UCSD. I would like to welcome the students, the faculty, the alumni for being here with us today. I would like to draw your attention to a couple of practical things before we get started. So please note that we are live streaming the event. So any noise, please be mindful of any noise in the room. There will be a question and answer short session after each presenter. If you need to leave the room, maybe that is the time to quietly exit or come back. For those of you watching on live streaming, I would like to encourage you to send us questions if you have. We will be receiving questions at Anthro alumni at UCSD, and we will try to address them here live for you. And with that, if there is nothing else to worry about for the beginning, I would like to give the stage to the students. They will be the ones introducing themselves and take the questions. And after they are done with their presentations, we're going to move on into the second part of the event, which is going to be about giving awards and recognizing exceptional student achievement. Okay, thank you very much. So Hans.
Hi everyone, my name is Hans Hubbard. I'm a double major in political science and social anthropology, and I will be presenting my honors thesis. See if I can. Okay, so I will be presenting my thesis entitled "Producing Europe, Reproducing Christendom: The Rapprochement of Spiritual Authority and Secular Power in a Neo-Medieval European System." It is fundamentally a problematization of existing narratives on the history of the European Union and a study of the European Union not merely as a political, economical, or material phenomenon, but as an anthropological one. I will try to problematize the narrative they already have. I'd like to thank you all in advance for your patience. If you've heard me speak before, you'll know that it will be needed. So let's begin. So the traditional narrative of the European Union paints it as a reaction to the Second World War in order to make war, to quote the Schuman Declaration, materially impossible, that it is necessary to promote prosperity and unity in Europe, and that it is underpinned by a series of widely shared European values. This is sort of the standard narrative. There are some problems with it, of course. First of all, from an international relations point of view and a political definitions point of view, it is very difficult to actually define what the European Union is. So some of the competing interpretations is that when it first got started, it was painted as a nascent state. It is very clear to students of this topic that this has not happened, and it is not likely to happen anytime soon. A competing explanation is that of an empire, so that has been sort of in vogue from the moment of expansion into Eastern Europe. But there's certain problems with that definition as well, namely that the European Union has not actually taken on all of the roles of a traditional empire. It has not actually cornered, say, the quote-unquote market on military activities in the continent, and it has not expanded militarily. There's also the problem of having different attitudes in culturally different European states. So you have a big divide between Protestant and Catholic, traditionally Protestant and Catholic states. Catholic states tend to be a bit more pro-integration than Protestant states. You can see that, for example, in the difference between France and England, UK. And finally, the democratic deficit, which is a very important topic in European Union studies. So I'm suggesting a new approach to studying the European Union. First of all, to apply an anthropological framework to its study, to examine the ideological underpinnings of integration, and to try to understand its historical origins beyond the Second World War, And I believe that this will suggest new realities, both about what the EU was historically and what it may become. So the approach I took to it is actually based on structuralist theory. Now, obviously, structuralist theory is not sort of, as widely accepted as it used to be in anthropology, but I don't take it as necessarily something to be falsified or to, it's merely a lens through which to look at a phenomenon, and it may suggest new connections that may be useful in trying to go from there and study the phenomenon. So, of course, we're all familiar with this. I'll not go too deep into this, but the basic idea is that complex social organizations can be derived from this, for simple principles of exchange that people have with each other. And it asks, what are the underlying structures of thought in a social system? So the classic example is kinship being deduced, like complex kinship systems deduced from logics of marital exchange. So, for example, you have something like this, an Igbo kinship system, which seems extremely complex from looking at it from the top down. But if you actually look at how, say, that guy over there relates to this other guy over here, you get the logics that underpin these interactions, and you may be able to actually work up the system from the underlying logics. So my question then is, if we do this for, what else looks really complex? And this is something like the European Union. So it's a very complex system, and I ask, can we do the same thing? Kinship systems. So we ask then, what are the underlying logics of integration? I tried to simplify the system of the EU a little bit, and so this is what I graphed as. The traditional sort of narrative of what the EU has member states interacting with each other via the EU, and the EU being underpinned and also promoting these quote-unquote European values. And so I ask, what else looks like this with the system? Something that suggested itself to me was the Catholic model of grace. So grace, theologically, is God's gift to humanity. It is what allows people to orient themselves to God. It is basically the sort of force that God endows people with that allows them to function as good Christians. In the Catholic view, grace is a reciprocal relationship. So people do good actions and God gives them grace in return. But the big point about this is that this reciprocal relationship is actually mediated through the church. So the good actions don't go directly to God. They are rather ratified by the rules of the church, and thus they are then, in a manner of speaking, sent up to God, who then bestows grace to people through the sacraments of the church. So it is fundamentally a system of legitimizing action through a mediating body. So then I decided to try to convert this to politics, see what this would look like if we turn it into a political system. Now, this is not as unorthodox a practice as it may first appear. In fact, in the Western tradition, there is a long, long tradition of equating states to people, of equating international relations to societies of individuals. So if we see, for example, Plato talking about how one may see justice in the same way as one sees it in a person, one sees it in the city. One has Grotius, who speaks about how international relations should basically be run as societies of individuals are. So if we redefine grace as political legitimacy, what it basically will predict is an international system of authority, some sort of intervening body between the principle of legitimacy and the nation state. And now, what I'm asking then is, because this has basically been an example in sort of theoretical creativity, is if this is actually underpinned by historical fact. And so what I went ahead and did is try to explore the actual ideological roots of the European Union in terms of its history, in terms of the people that actually pushed it forward. And I asked, what is the last time that Europe has actually seen a system, something like what the European Union is, a system of international authority, relativizing the power of independent nation states. And, well, the immediately suggested entity is the medieval world system. As we all know, the medieval world system is punctuated by the fall of Rome on one side and by the rise of the Westphalian nation-state system in 1648. And is characterized by ideological uniformity and paradoxically a multiplicity of political agents. So you have basically a continent where most people believe the same thing, but you don't have a monolithic sort of political entity. You have many different sort of agents that can claim political legitimacy. It's also characterized by an organic and complementary view of governance. So the Middle Ages sees the polity as an organism that has different functioning parts and different forces that complement each other. So these are, authority and power primarily. This comes all the way from ancient Rome, and in fact, the Middle Ages as a political project are primarily sort of a restorative project of the Roman Empire. Now, this does bring up the question: is, well, it's easy to say Rome this or Rome that in terms of the Middle Ages, and of course, Rome is a very long-lived entity, and it's problematic to say that Rome did anything or did something else. But the point here is that we're not actually looking at all that Rome was, but rather how Rome was idealized by medieval people. And at that point, you can actually talk about a sort of unitary view of the Roman Empire, because medieval people are by necessity saw Rome through a single point of historical contact. So the sort of the middle. So I study the medieval world system, the medieval political system, in terms of what I consider three underpinning views that had truth, order, and tradition. So truth refers to this sort of ideological unity that I spoke about earlier, and I'm running a bit out of time, so I won't go too deep into this, but it basically sees knowledge as being something that is gained, that is static, and that it does not change and one acquires rather than one creates. So tradition is this idea of legitimacy being sort of temporally oriented. So the closer one is to the founding moments of the Middle Ages, which are the Roman Empire and the incarnation of Christ, the closer one is to those points, the more legitimate one is. And yeah, so this is not unlike, for example, the Kachin of Highland Burma or any other sort of Asiatic sacred kingships and things that were, you have a conflation of ancestor and legitimate. And then finally, order. This idea talked about as the policy as being mandated by God, as being complementary organism with different forces, and these are seen in the complementary power of kings and authority of bishops. And so the question then is, how do we get from this to the EU? The mechanism I propose is the role of elites as reproducers of social systems. So the idea being that social systems are reproduced through individuals and through their orientations. And so almost by definition, those individuals who have greater agency will be key reproducers of social systems. They're the gatekeepers of social action, and they actually are the gatekeepers of projects. So if one wants to get a project off the ground, one needs the approval and support of elites. And I think any sort of view of history that does not paint elites as key reproducers has to contend with the question then of what exactly it means to be an elite. And so the actual change that we see in elite orientation at the beginning of the 20th century Europe is after a crisis of authority, which I will not go too deep into at the moment, but you have a reconciliation of spiritual leaders and secular leaders. So the 19th century was famously a moment of separation, so the apex of the separation between church and state. And you have in the early 20th century secular leaders actually finding a place for Christian tradition in their view of government, and also from the church of finding a place for modernity within its ranks. So you have the reorientation of people like Pius XII, who makes social science a requirement of priestly training for the first time ever, and a ressourcement, a theological ressourcement, which is also called the new theology, but we don't like it. But it's basically a move towards seeing Catholic theology as both compatible and shaping of modernity. So we get to the sort of a parallel between the medieval system and the EU. You have ideological unity, this sort of self-evident idea of Europe. You have great quotes from like Pascal Lamy, who was chief of cabinet, who says things like, the people were not ready to agree to integration, so you had to get on without telling them too much about what was happening. And it's this sort of self-evident idea of Europe. You have an emphasis on tradition, so you have the great theoreticians of Europe have emphasized the sort of continuity of a tradition going from the ancient world and from Christianity to the joining of Europe in a new sort of system. Crucifix was declared a secular symbol of the European Union by the European Court of Justice. And then finally, we have, again, this return to a view of governments as ordered and complementary. So you have this idea of the authority of Europe and these values relativizing the power of nation states. And so the sort of the conclusion is basically that if we study the EU as a historical process, we can see that it was heavily influenced by Catholic political thought. It was brought about by a reconciliation of the spiritual and secular spheres, and it's a return to the medieval model of governance, which is underpinned by a logic of a new Christendom emerging. In terms of sort of the limitations of this, of course, this is not a discussion of the material conditions for integration, but rather its underlying ideologies and logics. Also, in terms of the future, Catholicism affected what the structure looks like now. But in the future, you have enlargement obviously into areas with majority Orthodox populations. You have the great influence of Muslim immigrants and native Muslim populations who have grown. Sorry, I guess I'm out of time, but I'll field any questions. So I think the sort of uncomfortable relationship between the Union and the EU, this is part of it, it's not all of it. Yes, there's a religious tradition that goes into it. There's also a difference in sort of traditions of democracy and parliamentary, and the way the parliaments work. So the EU famously has a different view of parliaments. It's a ministerial system, not a presidential system like most of the rest of Europe. There's also the fact that the UK came out of the Second World War as having just had a large empire, and so it's at that sort of uncomfortable middle place orientation where it doesn't know where to go to, as the saying goes, with Berlin or Washington. And of course, there's also a problem of juridical systems. So in terms of, this is a big gripe that that sort of Eurosceptics in England have with lawmaking. The juridical system in the UK is a common law system. Most of the rest of Europe is not. So there's a big disconnect in a lot of different ways, but it does come down to a difference in both material history and ideological traditions.
And I should have started by saying, you did say the way no course in anthropology has that.
Hard task indeed. Well, okay, yeah, so economics. So at the end, I sort of mentioned this is not a study of the material conditions for integration. But I have done work in that particular area in the past. And you actually see some very interesting correlations. So if you actually study the share of world GDP that certain nation states had at different points in the history of, in history, you actually see a very good correlation between when Western Europe falls in its share of GDP to the United States and integration. Very interestingly, the first data point we have for the UK falling below the share of world GDP that that Germany and France have is 1973, the same year that the UK joins the European Union. Of course, there's other political matters of the goal blocking UK membership and things like that. But I do certainly agree that economics played a big part of it. It's just that this is not a study of what allowed integration to happen. It's rather when it did happen, how did it come to be shaped the way it is today? Because we could have, Europe could have become integrated in many different ways, and the fact that it did in this particular way is something we must also account for. Okay, I'm out of time.
Unless you have any questions from alumni over email. Okay, well, thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Anyone need a parking permit? I didn't get one. In order to take it.
Thank you all for coming, and all of those of you tuned in as well. My name is Jared Eckengren, and the name of my thesis is Listening to Drugs, Understanding Psychopharmaceutical Subjectivities Through Medication Discussion. And let's get to it. When I say psychopharmaceuticals, I'm basically talking about any psychoactive medication that's used to treat a mental health disorder or issue, your antidepressants, your ADHD medications, anti-anxiety, antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, etc. And basically, as mental health issues become of increasing importance domestically and globally, it also becomes increasingly important to continually evaluate and reassess our treatment methods and their impacts. With psychopharmaceuticals standing as the primary treatment method and sometimes the only treatment method for these issues, this is why I believe it's an important topic to look at. So by looking at the aspects of the subjective or the lived in the world experience of these drugs, I hope to broaden the understanding of the impacts these drugs can have in the lives of patients and their social networks. And we'll do this by listening to what patients have to say about their medications and how they affect them. And just sort of putting into context, if we remove neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and things like that, neuropsychiatric disorders make up about 13 to 14% of the global burden of disease, according to the World Health Organization, and are actually predicted to be, well, depression is predicted to be the leading disease burden by the year 2020. So it's obviously something that we can look at as being very important to look at. As the effects of globalization continue, the exportation of our medical models, Western medical models, such as the use of psychopharmaceuticals as a primary treatment, will continue to march onward, making this increasingly relevant both domestically as well as globally. So in this Western biomedical paradigm that we have, we often view mental illness as a simple chemical imbalance in the brain, which can be fixed by increasing, decreasing, or modulating the right brain chemical in the right way. When we consider how important the social determinants and human variation are in mental illness, some have referred to this concept as neurochemical reductionism. Additionally, when evaluating the efficacy of medications and their impact, we often focus on symptom alleviation and side effects. And these aspects are certainly very important, of course, in assessing the drugs, but it is a narrow approach that often misses the cultural meanings associated with medications, which combined with their physical effects can have great impact on the lives of patients and their families. So, taking a look to illustrate this point at something non-drug related, we'll look at the view of soup in some Chinese cultures. Thank you, Katerina, for this. In certain Chinese cultures, explanatory models for illness are often perceived as a bodily imbalance of hot, cold, wet, or dry elements, which can be caused by a variety of factors, and eating the right foods is believed to have the capacity to reconcile such imbalances. Now, Chinese herbal soup in these groups carries a generally shared cultural belief of being a health-promoting food, but also can be prepared in particular ways, like with hot and cold temperatures, in order to restore the body back into harmony from that imbalanced state. So to many of these types of cultural understandings, these cultural issues, eating soup in this context, we could look at it as sort of a generally meaningless thing that's basically providing us the necessary calories, or pleasure. But in this context, these culturally derived meanings surrounding health and soup transform the process of ingestion, its effects on the body, and the self-shaping of its consumers into a subjective experience that's qualitatively richer than just making food and eating it. So these experiences and their effects couldn't be fully evaluated by narrowing our focus on the absence or presence of infirmity, or by examining the physiological processes enacted by the introduction of soup into the body. So when we look at these issues, excuse me for a second, we look at these issues kind of looking at it from the therapeutic assessment of the symptom alleviation and the physiological interactions aspect. They certainly tell us a vital part of the health story, but they in no way detail the meaning-charged experience of eating these soups, the embodied effects such meanings create, or how these processes shape concepts of self and interpersonal relationships. But this type of snapshot of another culture's explanatory models of health and illness and the cultural meanings they ascribe to objects and ideas, for example, their soup, help to illustrate how certain perceptual orientations, beliefs, and meanings can transform practices into powerfully shaping experiences beyond the most obvious physical effects. So in this research, I draw from a variety of theoretical frameworks. Some I've already mentioned several times. I look at patients' explanatory models of their treatment and illness, drawing from medical anthropologist Arthur Kleinman. I look at the way people understand themselves to be ill and the feelings associated with that as working together to constitute an individual's explanatory model of their condition. In respect to phenomenology and embodiment, the work I've done is informed by an understanding that uses phenomenology, the term, to refer to how individuals experience existence through emotions, mental states, sensory perceptions, and the experience of being in a physical body, of course. In conjunction with culturally mediated the phenomenological orientations, processes of self and self-conception are also shaped through culture and experience. And I've used the framework as outlined by Janice Jenkins here of the psychopharmaceutical self and imaginary in order to examine these aspects. So if we're looking at taking the definition of self as I put here in the first bullet point, then the pharmaceutical self represents how one's aspects of self are oriented by and towards psychopharmaceutical drugs. And the pharmaceutical imaginary represents the conceivable possibility drug or drugs may have in changing human life. Now, Jenkins positions these concepts as reciprocal components of the subjective experience of an individual and their relationship with psychopharmaceuticals. Now, by viewing the self and imaginary as necessarily linked components of an individual subject's experience, we assume a perspective that can look directly at how selves are created, altered, and oriented by the cultural meanings and understandings constructed by larger institutional and cultural schemas of psychopharmaceutical use. So I went about this research looking into existing anthropological literature on the subjective experience of psychotropic medications in order to compare it to unpublished primary data from the SWIAP project, which stands for Southwest Youth Experience of Psychiatric Treatment. And the SWIAP data consists of transcribed interviews with adolescent psychiatric patients in New Mexico and their parents or guardians. This is housed in a qualitative software program, which I use also to separate 89 different categories and code 89 different categories of their conversations into nodes. And drawing on these data, I basically focus on the medication node in order to analyze the role of these drugs in the patient's experience of self, social relations, and illness explanation. And reading through these accounts, I paid special attention to their particular orientations towards the medication regimens, any somatic effects, if they perceived them as helpful or harmful, how it affected their personalities, and then really any other sentiment that might give insight into how these medications were shaping the lived experience of patients and their social networks. This is just a quick overview, a diagnostic overview of the cohort that I looked at. I don't know if you guys can see. It covers, obviously a gamut. There's a lot of overlapping mental health diagnoses, and the medications prescribed were many and varied. On average, The cohort was prescribed over 5 different psychopharmaceuticals over the course of their treatment, and the maximum of that range is 11. The minima is 2 distinct psychotropic medications prescribed. Just give you a background there. Now, basically, looking at Joao Biel's Anthropology, Joao Biel's ethnography of Katerina as a point of reference for this. This woman was a this woman she basically was a woman abandoned by her family who lived in a psychiatric institution in southern Brazil. She was frequently, he describes her as being too drunk to talk on many occasions, but she wrote in a journal and frequently referenced herself as Katkine or Katkine, which is a combination of her name, Katerina, and a combination of the drug Akhenaton, which, or Akhenaton, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. But basically, this case provides a strong example of how medications can become such an instrumental part of a person's existence and the process of taking them, that they can be inscribed on the self in such a way that's conceived the sum of one's very essence. Now, with that in mind, we look at the mediation of self that happens here in the SWIAP group, and just in the interest of time, I'll cruise through this, but here on the left, we have Mark, who has the goal of stabilizing, and his conception of his ideal self as a stable one is conceived of solely in terms of medication. His subjective engagement of the pharmaceutical imaginary places the locus of his desired self as fixed within a precise combination of medications. There are many variable terms of mentions of stabilization and becoming imbalanced with many of these people, often embodying this neurochemical explanatory model as explained to them by their doctors. Many of them conceive of themselves as having a permanent brain chemical imbalance that would necessitate a lifetime of medication. On the right here is an interesting case of Ronald, who conceived of himself as a psychiatric junkie, which is a stigmatic term. Could go into that, but we'll move on for time. Here we have Anthony, who elaborates on the physical sensation of feeling all dried up. So his engagement and the cultural meanings for him are working to enact this embodied experience of feeling dried up physically. And that's really sort of the important thing to point out there. I do want to point out that with these examples that I've chosen, these aren't cherry-picked outliers. These are representative of common and recurring themes across all of the people in this study. So it's important for me to say that. Now, one of the recurring themes across almost all of them is patient agency and being able to achieve some sense of control in their illness and their treatment, whether that's through medications or refusing medications or negotiating the terms of their medication process. And here's some example. We have the top Alicia, who didn't feel like a person or doesn't remember the person she was when she was off medication. And it was only when she got on medication that she had a personality or became a person. That goes, this type of example kind of shows the kind of powerlessness, people can have in the throes of their illnesses. On the bottom, we have a foil to that, Angela, where she basically, as opposed to Alicia, whose unmedicated self was a foreign stranger out of control, Angela seems to feel that she wasn't a person at all when she was on medication, and she emotes about finally being someone when she's off her meds. And Bernard, he basically knows he needs to take his meds, but he's going to negotiate with his grandmother to have her pay him to do it. So he was pretty funny, but that's another good example. We'll move on. Another really common theme is this aspect of the struggle for agency with the parents and guardians. It's certainly not limited to the patients. It was very pervasive with the parents. And on the left, Anthony's mother worries about the health of her son and the possibility of harmful consequences of extreme polypharmacy or the act of or the practice of being on multiple medications. There was one particular example where there was a time where they were trying to zero in on a diagnosis by testing all types of different medications on Anthony to zero in on what his reaction is and make a diagnosis from that. Eventually, she felt like he was overdrugged, and she changed doctors as a way to gain control back in that situation. On the right, the mother of Angela expresses a very common sentiment. I heard the word guinea pigs over and over again in these interviews, and that was a very common theme, feeling like their children were test subjects for the medical establishment. So, just in conclusion here, in terms of harm prevention and the amelioration of psycho-emotional states of distress, it's clear that medications can serve as an invaluable and often necessary mode of treatment for mental health disorders. Along with these benefits, the effect of psychopharmaceutical treatment goes beyond symptom mitigation. As seen through patient and guardian examples of the lived experience of these regimens, subjective orientation towards drugs influences a variety of factors in the conception of self and the patient and familial struggle for agency in their treatment. Patient's sense of self can be shaped through an existential integration of subject and medication, or self can be conceived of in direct opposition to medication through refusal or negotiation. The family and social unit, an inextricable component of illness experience, also searches for agency in the course of their child's treatment. This desire is expressed with the recurring perception of the children being used as guinea pigs. With the use of psychopharmaceuticals as a critical and entrenched practice in psychiatric care, further understanding of these subjective experiences of these drugs should help to inform medical health professionals as well as families and social units to improve practice in treating mental health patients. Thank you. Questions? And are there time for questions, or should we go to?
Yes, we can take a couple.
Okay. Well, I'll do Professor Goldstein since he has asked a question.
Well, I'm just wondering if you did the subjects do have
yeah.
Do you track any of the differences in some cases? Counter examples.
Sure.
Did you track any of it by ethnicity?
I started to, and then it became kind of immense. So I did, and that's a really important point. That's great. So the question was, did I track their different ethnicities and demographic data, and it was a diverse population, and did I track those ethnicities and different conceptions of self cross-culturally there, right, between those? I did track the ethnicities, but for the purposes of this research, I was just looking at any common recurring themes across all as a much broader sense, with the idea that I would go back and tease out things like ethnicity and gender, socioeconomic status, things like that. So it's something that I considered, but for the purposes of this thesis, I didn't go into that.
I think you answered it in the last answer, but given that they were on different drugs,
Mhm.
did you find this commonality across all the different drugs, or how did you deal with the fact that the narrative was from people who are on different?
Sure. Yeah. So the question is for our viewers. The question is, people are on different medications. So how did I account for that potentially different experiences because they were on different medications with different effects? So that's a really good question. I honestly didn't really have to because they were so similar. They almost all were on ADHD medications from a very early age, shocking early ages, for several people. And they were all pretty much on at different points on different combinations of ADHD medications, antidepressants, many of them on antipsychotics. And these are patients that had significant psychiatric issues. So they were generally all on a very, on a cocktail of all of these things at one point or another. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, if you just give me a moment to set up.
My name is Sarah Mace, and my disciplinary focus is in archaeology. First of all, I want to thank all of you for being here and listening to all of our theses. Mine was conducted under the advisement of Professor Thomas Levy, and the title of my thesis is Tales of the Dead, the Rapid Diversification of Mortuary Practices in the Southern Levant. So in conducting this project, I decided to focus on the possible ideological and practical context for the rationale behind the expansion and diversification of mortuary practices in the Chalcolithic Southern Levant. In the process, I have by necessity addressed the types of societies, but this is not an extensive reconstruction of the societies at this time. In the process of writing my thesis, I focused on a few questions that address the practical and ideological contribution to the forms of mortuary practices that existed in the Chalcolithic Southern Levant, the causes for their explosion and diversification from the previous Neolithic, and the purposes of these different practices. So the significance of this project focuses on the rapid diversification and explosion of mortuary practices from the previous period, because this is a period unique for an unprecedented amount of burial sites. And by looking at this period, it is possible to gain understanding of the explosion and diversification and gain insight into the rationale provided for the rationale that is behind all these practices. So for a bit of background, I have an image of the Southern Levant at the right, and it covers what is modern day Israel, Palestine, and parts of Jordan. Also included in my discussion is the Sinai Peninsula. The Chalcolithic period covers 4,500 to 3,600 BCE in the Southern Levant. And mortuary practices at this time expanded rapidly and diversified from practices typical of the previous Neolithic period, as I mentioned before. In the process of doing this project, I focused primarily on library research and an analysis of published works with a focus on the Shechem Cemetery Complex, which is one of the sites in the Southern Levant. And by looking at this site, I was able to conduct a comparative study based on location, burial, and any artifacts found with the remains. And the divisions that I found are mainly burial caves, multiple burial caves, open-air cemeteries, and the mountains. The aim of this was to analyze the rationale behind the various mortuary practices and understand the changing outlook towards death during human prehistory. And so there are a lot of theories that address this. And for the purpose of my thesis, I focused on three under the context of a practical and ideological lens of what these theories may fit under. And the theories I will discuss are territorial claim, regionalism, and social complexity. So the question is, are mortuary practices primarily influenced by practical or ideological rationale, or are they affected by both? And whether the theories I mentioned fit under the two categories. But it's not so simple to separate them, especially at this time period. What we may consider as completely ideological today, such as a ritual, would be at this time period part of a practical everyday life in order to ensure certain effects. And so one of the theories that I mentioned is territorial claim. There is a possibility that cemeteries were used as a marker for territory. And in order to test this, it would require a visibility analysis, which would be conducted through GIS, a Geographic Information System, and I will discuss more of that later. But that leads to social complexity. At this period, there are a couple of leading theories as to the level of complexity. Two-tier chiefdoms is suggested by Professor Levy, and I have put an image at the bottom to try to demonstrate what this is. Basically, there are regional centers that hold some form of power over other settlements in the area, and these regional centers may be political control, religious control, or commercial control. On the opposite side of this debate, scholars suggesting a more egalitarian society, and is against the idea that there was such a degree of social complexity at this time. But there is a possibility, and it is actually likely, that there is regional differences in complexity based on differences in transitions from the previous Neolithic period, and based off of the finds in the Golan Heights versus the Jordan Valley, Coastal Plain, Negev, and Sinai. Because if you look at the Golan Heights and then southern Levant, there is typically not very many luxury items found with the burials. And if you compare this to the other areas mentioned, there are many luxury items, including ivory and jewelry. And this may also contribute to the various mortuary practices that are found. And finally, I need to discuss regionalism. Regional differences in mortuary practices can be affected by environment, culture, and time. Environment limits the types of mortuary practices that are possible in this in any area. For instance, a cave, which may be used to store bones, is not necessarily the option available in the Negev desert. Culture is a little more difficult to determine, but differences in ideology or culture are reflected in the burial practices themselves. And up to 11 or more culturally distinct groups are identified for this time period in the southern Levant. And finally, time is important to consider because this is an 1,000-year period, and not all of these sites are contemporary, and so there may be diversity based on when these sites existed. And so I'm going to move into my comparative studies. So this is the southern Levant pictured here, and I have a map with an image of some of the sites. And later I will be discussing the sites illustrated by the stars. Briefly, the different types of sites are burial caves, which are common to the coastal plain, where you see most of the dots. Open air cemeteries, which are, two of the examples are the yellow star and the red star shown. And Nawamis, which I do not have in this picture because they are more common to the Sinai Peninsula, which is farther south than this map shows. So to briefly discuss burial caves, they are typically either a single cave or a multiple cave, meaning that the ossuaries, which are shown, if I can pull up an image, that is an ossuary there. It is a ceramic receptacle that is used for the storage of bones in a secondary burial. So what would typically happen is the primary burial would allow the body to decay, and the bones would be picked up and put in this ossuary and put into a cave. Single cave sites are exactly what they sound like. There's one cave that these burials are found, and they're more common to the northern coastal plain. Multiple caves are more common to the southern coastal plain, and they are sites that include multiple caves next to each other, as the name suggests, which may have different receptacles used for each of them, including burial jars or stone basins. And important to note is that the most common burial container is an ossuary. And so I will need to talk about open air cemeteries because my case study fits into this category. They are typically above ground with visible structures, and they may actually, I have two images that would fit for the open air cemeteries as seen the burial circle on the top right and the Nawami on the bottom. The burial circle picture is from Palmahim, which is not one of the sites I mentioned, but it is typical of the structure that burial circles may take. And Nawamis are typical to the Sinai Peninsula. They are above ground with visible structures, as I have mentioned, and they are common to the northern Negev and found at sites, as I go back, such as the red star and the yellow star. The red star is a Adema, which is associated possibly with Rasul, which is an important regional center, and the yellow star of Shikmin. And these are tentatively associated as a Dead Sea funerary culture, as all of them are similar. And there are exceptions to this rule to be considered, though. Tisafim Road, the site there, indicated by the blue star, is located on the western Negev and is close to the coastal plain. It is unique for the different practices exhibited there, including a large rectangular building, much like a house that is only accessible from above, and other burial practices such as pits and an interesting exhibit of gravestones there, which may be indicative of communication between the separate regions and temporal differences between the different practices. Oh, sorry. So Adema is temporally associated with Tilak, as I mentioned, and it could have served as a regional mortuary site. It has held several pits with primary burials, and but the cysts are associated with burial structures where secondary interment may have occurred. Then the green star to the north is Pekakini, which is famous for its intricate ossuary designs and wealth of burial goods. It stands out from other single burial caves based on the presence of luxury items. And the ossuaries are highly detailed and anthropomorphic. And the luxury items actually separated from the other 9 single cave mortuary sites, presenting the possibility that this is an example of a more complex site in the northern coastal plain. The multiple burial caves to the south are typically more complex in terms of burial goods that may be found with them. And the different caves themselves may exhibit differences in time and separation of social hierarchy. And so, once I get past these images again, I will go to my case study of Shikmin. What you see here is a Google Earth image of the site today. And the numbers 1 through 7 are each of the cemeteries themselves. 1 through 6 are on a series of chalk hills, which would have allowed it to be visible from afar. And Shikmin and Shikmin South are the 2 sites that are especially important to this. And I'll have to go quickly through the rest of this. It is important to note that Shikmin is a possible regional center, which would include control over the nearby settlement of Nizad Aluf. And to test the theory, well, first let me go to Cemetery 1. This is an example of the map of the burial circles found at Cemetery 1. As you can see, they are different sizes, and some of them are connected, which indicate both temporal differences and possible differences in hierarchy. And to test the idea of territorial claim in this area, I have been conducting ongoing research on ArcGIS and viewshed analysis, which I said I would talk about, but I do not have enough time. So I will go to my discussion to address the questions I mentioned earlier. Practicality and ideology are both factors in ultimate formation of mortuary practices. And population expansion, increasing social complexity, need for territorial claim, and regionalism all led to the explosion and diversification of pragmatic mortuary practices. And the purposes of these practices were a tool for the living in the emergence and complexity of the Paleolithic, and as ritual and new cultic practices. And thank you for listening. Any questions?
Possible to date these sites so that you know what the relative ages are? Did you date the materials preserved to date?
Can you repeat the question, please, for the last bit?
The question is it possible to date these sites? It is. There is some issues with dating typically, but most of these are pretty reliably dated. I did not address them in my presentation. But the problem is largely finding the right materials for this.
Because if the whole time constant, at least remove the question of parties because they each other.
Well, one of the factors that contributes to the, that is a major aspect of time is that some of these sites span nearly across the entirety of this period and had interactions with other sites that had shorter lifetimes, as Ryder described it. But basically, there's not an easy way to break time down into small sections and discuss it that way. All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Megan McNamara, and I'm an undergraduate sociocultural anthropology student here at UC San Diego. And my mentor is Professor Suzanne Brenner. My research looks at migration, love maintenance, and relationship longevity, and specifically perspectives of South Asian immigrants in London. So I want to thank you all for being here today and supporting our thesis cohort, and let's go ahead and get started. I want to give a quick overview of what I'm going to go through in this presentation. So first, I'm going to address the purpose of conducting this fieldwork and some of my methodology that went into my time in the field. I'm going to address traditional arranged marriage as well as love marriage in South Asia and how this differs from companionate love in the Western world, and look at some of the literature that surrounds immigration and companionate love in the anthropological sense today. And then I'm going to address select data from my interview findings over my time interviewing in London and discuss why my ethnographic work shows the significant need for updating the current literature and why we need to more broadly consider the popularity of partner-selected companionate love in the context of modernity all over the world. So before we get going, I want to just talk about some of my research questions that I had going into the field. And I had several, but I picked out three that I think are going to be addressed in this talk today. So one question I had was, do immigrant couples in Western countries experience dissonance between traditional ideologies about love and relationships in their new context post-migration? How does this affect ideologies of love and romance in future generations of migrant families? And do parents who undertook arranged marriages in their home countries change their perspective once they have children in this new space? And then lastly, what can be learned about relationship longevity and resilience from couples who withstood this challenge of immigration? So My purpose was first and foremost an ethnographic intention. I wanted to document stories and perspectives from South Asian communities in London. And then secondly, I wanted to link some of these characteristics and express relationship facets to longevity in a broader talk that I hope to sort of continue throughout my career. To address my research methods, I conducted fieldwork and observations in London over a year. January through August of 2014, I spent looking at companionate love and Western ideologies of love and romance through a survey that I did of 200 individuals in London and San Diego. And I also conducted qualitative research interviews with couples that I think represented a diverse gender, sexual preference, and cultural context within these two areas. But our focus today is going to be on the second half of my fieldwork. I conducted interviews with South Asian couples who had previously undertook arranged marriages in their home countries and then moved to the United Kingdom. I also conducted 2 additional interviews with informants that were between the ages of 18 and 25. I wish I would have had the opportunity to expand on this because this ended up being a very important aspect of my research. But my primary informants were from Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal. So I want to address traditional relationships in South Asia because I think it's very important to consider before we look at the context of migration. So selecting someone outside of your social class or ethnic background is often not only just looked down upon, it's also forbidden in a lot of instances. So in consideration of the historical caste system, for example, in India, some scholars argue that it's a historical past no longer worth evaluating in terms of modern social dynamics, and others argue that it has had enduring qualities that are still present in daily life, including romantic partnerships. Individual partner selection is seen as a Western and individualist practice in most of South Asia, and even in some migrant communities within Western cities. And it remains in opposition to traditional arranged marriage. Romantic love in South Asia, where individuals actually choose their own partners, is called love marriage. This is discussed in anthropological literature by Pervez Mahdi at Cambridge and several other scholars. However, it's a separate phenomenon from marriages in the traditional sense, and it's often associated with acts such as elopement and abduction. And the general understanding in the traditional context of marriage is that love should not precede marriage. However, marriages that have love, which comes after, is completely seen to be within the normal realm of possibility. So it's also important to understand that in South Asian arranged marriage, usually individuals have the choice not to marry the person that their family is matched them with. So they can object to a match. So what is the companionate love ideal, and what is the whole focus of this project? So companionate partnerships are based on affect and emotional intimacy, and they're becoming a desired feature in romantic unions all over the world. They're seen as a marker of modernity, and a lot of times when it's described in text. This is especially the case for younger age demographics, so namely the 18 to 30-year-old age range, where individuals are dealing firsthand with systems of monogamous partner selection. This has been made popular through imagery and through the Western portrayal of romance and love, which precedes marriage, and it's also especially popular in the Hindi or Bollywood film industry now in a South Asian sense. So to lay the foundation, we next need to consider Western romance, since in the case of my field site, it interfaces with the South Asian diasporic community. So romantic love in the Western world, monogamy and individual partner selection have been particularly common as a cultural phenomenon and something that most of us in this room are fairly familiar with. It is often considered by some to be advantageous for the rearing of children and the social construction of the family. All around the world, generations are discussing self-selected partnership and the importance of these effective bonds. They're discussing the opportunities they can seek through companionate partnership, as opposed to partnership which was defined by preceding generations, namely their parents or grandparents. So culture determines how and when men and women discuss courtship, love, and marriage. However, love itself is not culturally exclusive. So what does the current literature say on my topic? So although there may be transitions and changes in ideologies of romantic relationships, some aspects of cultural upbringing and socialization are enduring. For South Asian communities, one of the most significant value systems is an emphasis on family and community. So in cultural regions such as India, arranged marriage has actually remained persistent. Statistical data collected in the 1960s estimated between 90 and 95% of marriages were arranged by family. And then this was done by several scholars in the 2000s. And one study that I report in my thesis in 2006, it reported the same statistics as the 1960s. So this is not something that's really changing in South Asia so much. So while companionate marriage may be, conceivably on the rise in South Asia through popular portrayals such as film, and because of Western influence and globalization, it must be understood that a lot of cultural values are enduring, especially in this context. So the popular anthropological opinion in literature is that while a certain amount of flexibility and transition may occur over time with exposure, an entire historical system does not just disappear or become worthless overnight. My argument is that there are many newly emerging ideologies formed by migration, especially in consideration of love and family. So why London and why this research focus? While many studies have been done on couples within the context of their cultural upbringing, migration is an underrepresented space in regards to the study of arranged marriage and companionate love. London is one of the most diverse metropolitan cities in the world and has a very diverse migrant community. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka are among the top countries of origin. So many people from South Asia have moved to various parts of Europe because of conflict, politics, or desired life change. Examples include economic social mobility, which comes with education opportunity not available in one's home country. So today I want to give you a sampling of some of the work that I did, and I'm going to highlight one particular case study as well as a second-generation perspective of the couple's son that I interviewed. So focusing on this one primary interview, Sivakun Maran and Janaki are originally from Sri Lanka, and they live in Croydon, London, which is in the southeast portion of the city. Their oldest son, Vidharan, who's 25, was also a collaborator in this interview. He also helped me with several other interviews that I did. So Vidharan was born in Sri Lanka, but he was raised from the age of 5 in London, and his sister was born in London. So Sivakun Maran left home at 21 years old and sought a political asylum in Germany. Sri Lankan men were granted permission to stay and were offered support by the German government during the Sri Lankan Civil War of the 1980s. Among other Sri Lankan residents, Janaki's cousin was also living in asylum in Germany. They became friends, and Janaki's brother showed a photo of Janaki to Sivakun Maran and said he should consider marrying her. This was unconventional because Janaki was actually the youngest of her sisters, and technically it would have been proper for her cousin to arrange a meeting with his eldest female relative. It's frowned upon for a younger sibling to be married before the eldest. However, according to Sivakun Maran, Janaki's brother said the two of them had a lot in common and that he could really see them together. Sivakun Maran would not agree to a marriage until he met Janaki in person. A photo was just not going to do it for him. He suggested that Janaki's brother bring her to Germany, and upon taking that risk, he might consider a marriage. He held the belief that he wouldn't know for sure until they met, even if her brother insisted they were perfect for each other. So without saying anything to Janaki about Sivakun Maran, it was arranged for her to be sent to Germany. And at the time, she was 16 years old. So Sivakun Maran was 23. So Sivakun Maran agreed to marry Janaki, and since she liked him, they arranged a one-on-one meeting to talk and get to know each other better. But unfortunately, shortly after, Janaki was actually kicked out of her house because she had this publicly announced arranged marriage to Sivakun Maran, and she was the youngest in her family. So Sivakun Maran was told by her cousin that he should go and basically meet her prior to their marriage. And he said to me, I thought, why is her brother telling me this? This isn't a game. We aren't married yet. What can I possibly do to help? And so, after a while, he started considering things differently, and his mother told him that ultimately it was up to him, and rules need not apply for this particular situation. So he went to her, and he said, I can't promise you anything. I'm a poor boy from a poor background. There's nothing you can gain from me, but when I eat, half is yours. I can't promise you a palace or even guarantee you a bed to sleep in, but I can promise you that you can always sleep on my chest. The main thing is that you have to follow me. If you believe me, go to the taxi, and this is our marriage. You are my better half, but we don't have time to discuss. So if you believe me, get in the car. Janaki told me this story with a few tears in her eyes. I believe from listening to her that she really took this moment as her marriage to Sivakun Maran, knowing that she was ultimately choosing life with him forever. She also noted that she felt like he was a hero from a movie during this part of our interview, which I think most of us can sort of relate to that notion. So Janaki and Sivik and Martin had a fairly unconventional arranged marriage, but it's important to keep in mind that there's always diversity in marriage and relationships, even in an arranged marriage context. So in an attempt to make the unfamiliar somewhat familiar, I at this point would like to reflect on something known as a setup or a blind date in Western culture. For example, you have two single friends, and why would you consider setting them up? Oftentimes it's because they have similar education, family and upbringing might be similar, they might have matching values, similar attractiveness, how they spend their free time, all of these things. And so I asked Sivik and Martin and Janaki if they felt like these type of things were considered by their parents or by family members when arranged marriage is being considered in South Asia. And they both said absolutely. They said in most cases, family considers all of these things. And people usually have the option not to marry this individual. So although, the main difference is when people are introduced, generally it's you're going to be married very soon, as opposed to a blind date where you might date for several years prior to marriage. I would argue that it's sort of a similar situation when you're arranging something and you care about the people involved. So an interview question I always like to ask couples, regardless of where I'm at and who I'm talking to, is, what is the most important aspect of a romantic or marital relationship? And Janaki told me, first, to trust each other. There's a saying, there are two paths to the plow and they both need to be pulling in the same direction. In this circumstance, all you can do is trust that your partner will continue to pull in the same direction. Sivik and Martin said, it is expected that you surrender fully to God, and it's the same in marriage. One side should surrender. Surrender and the ability to surrender is a gift. People think that surrender is against ego, but it isn't. Surrender is a gift. In our marriage, the first half she surrendered to me, and now I need to surrender to her. She gave me so much in life and followed me. Now it's my turn to follow her. So I want to skip ahead and talk about some of the second generation perspectives that I got out of this experience. So it was interesting to interview second generation adults whose parents had undertaken arranged marriage in South Asia, and they themselves had grown up in the UK. So Vidaran is someone that I talked to extensively about this, and I just want to pull one quote, that he thought about, South Asian arranged marriage and companion love. He said to me, one of the factors that drives me away from arranged marriage is the number of unhappy marriages that I have witnessed in my parents' generation. The social stigma attached to divorce in our culture means that couples remain together for the sake of reputation and doom themselves to a life of misery, restriction, and confinement. They live out their entire lives not knowing what it's like to share a life with someone with whom they are truly in love. Instead, the family appears to be a good traditional family, but there are underlying problems that create deep-seated resentment, which affects all members of the family. I acknowledge that this highlights a generational ideological shift to seeing companionate love and being truly in love in a new light, where two people enter into a relationship, possibly one which leads to marriage based on happiness, which is in opposition to what he sees occurring on a significant level in his parents' generation. People being unhappy for the long term, even if they're still together. So in conclusion, it became clear to me that although the couples I interviewed did have marriages under the cultural constraints of their home culture, they had a great deal of flexibility. In Janaki and Sivik and Martin's story, we see their marriage began in an unconventional way, which they were both okay with. So although having an arranged marriage, they both agreed to having a connection and feelings for each other, which allowed them to make decisions at the beginning of their relationship. Ultimately, relationships are tied to values, and relationship longevity in South Asia is tied to selflessness and putting family or one's partner first, or what Sivik and Martin addresses as the notion of surrender. Thus, while a great deal of traditional values translate to this new context, there's also a great deal of transition to the companionate love ideal as a dominant form in this new space, an acknowledgement that some may want to choose their own partners. Younger generations may also have more opportunity in regard to partner selection. The current literature focuses far too much on traditional values and hardly acknowledges first and subsequent generational transformations in ideology in this new context. I propose a strong need and desire to update the anthropological literature because, to the best of my knowledge, there's a much greater sense of transformation and change that is acknowledged. And I find these shifts in ideology to be astonishing and significant. Thank you. Yeah, time for one question.
You said it's possible to turn down the arranged marriage. How many times can you do that?
Oh, that's a good question. So, this is going to be different depending on which, country you're talking about. But from my interviews with South Asian people, people generally feel like they can have the veto. How often this actually happens, though, is, I think, surprisingly low. I haven't read any statistics on this, but if you think about it, your parents are spending so much time and effort, I mean, sometimes a year, really looking for someone who would be a good spouse for you, someone that you could raise a family with. So in all actuality, you know, a lot of times you see people really not saying no to these marriages. I had one couple that said, it was a woman I was speaking to, and she was from India, husband's from India, and you know, she said that she was introduced to him for the first time, and basically they left, and her father asked, you know, what she thought of him, and she said, well, I don't know, you know, she basically had met him one time, and he goes, well, do you want to marry him? And she said, I don't know. She's like, do you want me to marry him? And her father responded, yes, that himself and her whole family felt like it would be a good match for her, and she said that she would do it. So I think that in this particular sense, when family is so important and you so highly value someone's opinion, it might be good for you, I think that the veto actually happens a lot less than you think. So how many times would people be able to say no? I mean, under this like situation, I think probably unlimited times you could say no, but will you be able to get married if you're, you know, repeatedly say no to partner setups? Probably not. I would think so. Anyways, thank you very much for your time. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vanessa Monson. My thesis advisor was Professor Jeffrey Braswell, and my thesis is entitled New Insights on Teotihuacan Interaction. So as the title suggests, I decided to direct my library research towards Teotihuacan interaction. I chose this topic because I had recently completed a course on the history of Mesoamerica, and I'm sort of enthralled with Teotihuacan and its place in that history. This is a long-running archaeological research interest that goes back decades and has an immense body of literature associated with it. And research goals typically revolve around developing models or repurposing models to explain the patterns of interaction. And the reason this is there is no neat explanation for interaction that fully encompasses all of the available evidence. In addition, new evidence for interaction is still being uncovered, and that data has to be accounted for and assimilated. So this is a dynamic research interest that will no doubt continue to be relevant. So there are three main components in my thesis that I will be discussing today, and these are recent models for interaction, markers for interaction, and I will summarize some archaeological data from 3 different regions: the Basin of Mexico, the Tuxtla Mountains, and an area in Chiapas. So for the models, the first one is, in a 2014 article, scholars Golitko and Feynman apply a social network analysis to obsidian assemblages in Mesoamerica between 900 BC and AD 1520. So they note that traditional views of the Mesoamerican economy focused on trade and exchange that was directly mediated by elites and urban centers, or models based on least cost considerations that take into account the geography of exchange routes. So network analysis kind of highlights how patterns of connections are structured and changes in those structures over time. And these results can be evaluated against those traditionally held views. So the authors specifically wanted to evaluate the position of Teotihuacan and whether or not it was as central as it is often posited to be. And despite what the graphic representations look like, it is not just a direct representation of ancient trade networks. It's looking at the end product of the consumption of obsidian that is found in assemblages and constructing a network based on assemblage similarity measures. So the strength of a tie between two settlements shows collectively the volume of transport, the length between settlements, and regularity of flow, so that the tie strength demonstrates that the connection was both operational and significant in the past. And this practice is best utilized to demonstrate changes in patterns and positions over time. So for period 4, as the authors designated it, which was 250 BC to AD 250, Teotihuacan does not appear central. And for period 5, which is up on the screen, which is from the time period 8300 to 600,
Teotihuacan has only a slightly more central position compared to the preceding period, and the site of Los Rocones, which is a site that I'll discuss later, appears to be the most important bridging site linking eastern and western Mesoamerica. And so the authors concluded that from very early on, the Mesoamerican system was characterized by larger scale connectivity that showed cyclical patterning over time. In a 2015 article, scholar Fellini outlines a strategy governing Teotihuacan interaction based on the spread of a Teotihuacan ideology centered on fertility and militaristic concepts. So religious rituals were important for social reproduction within Teotihuacan, and he believes symbolic acts, including rituals and ceremonies, were a crucial part of Teotihuacan's foreign political practice and strategy. Access to symbolic resources like religion and ritual was just as important as access to objective resources like wealth and factors of production in generating and maintaining cities, states, and empires. And some religious ideas that were part of rituals at Teotihuacan were exported to foreign polities. And the three most prevalent of these were the feathered serpent deity, the storm god, and the butterfly complexes. And those are two pictures of burial sites that the male warriors are copying the traditional goggles of the storm god. Or they say goggles, but they look like goggles. And so he says that an exchange network evolved that was centered around ritual items necessary for the reproduction of Teotihuacan ideology abroad, and he characterizes this system as a prestige goods circuit. So Teotihuacan ideology was not just absorbed, it was sometimes incorporated, sometimes resisted, and sometimes reinvented depending on the receiving quality. And he also further notes that exchange systems that are based on ritual artifacts are not designed to last, and this weakness contributed to the decline of Teotihuacan. And then in their examination of settlements in the Tuxtla Mountains, Stoner and Poole used disjuncture to conceptualize the foreign influence of Teotihuacan. Instead of examining the long-distance interaction, they focus on how external or foreign influences are negotiated in the receiving area. Specifically, they examined the variability with which Teotihuacan symbols, ideology, and economic influences were adopted in different settlements in the Tuxtla Mountains. They argue that the founding of Matacapan, which is a site that we'll be discussing a bit, by people with strong ties to Teotihuacan disrupted the regional trajectory, and differential negotiations of foreign and local cultural information and influence led the groups in the region to culturally diverge. And the cultural divergence between the groups possibly increased economic interactions between them, and the evidence suggests that the groups cooperated despite their emerging cultural differences. So these are some pictures of some of the markers for interaction. So something like interaction is obviously intangible. So material proxies are used and measured instead. And these can include items, materials, and stylistic conventions that originated from or were considered to be monopolized by Teotihuacan. And their presence or absence are considered as evidence for or against interaction. And I chose to limit the categories considered to ceramics, including both imports and copies, architecture, which includes site layouts, and obsidian from the Pachuca source, which is believed to be monopolized by Teotihuacan. So when choosing which archaeological sites or regions to evaluate, I kind of needed to narrow my focus. So I elected to limit to places that have had data published in the last decade. And this filtering process generated 3 regions: the Basin of Mexico, the Tuxtla Mountains, and Los Rocones. So 2 settlements in the Basin of Mexico that exhibit markers for interaction differ by degree. Axtotlan was established during Teotihuacan's apogee, and it contains residential compounds much like the apartment compounds seen at the capital. And ceramic assemblages there contain the full range of Teotihuacan forms and wares, including objects associated with domestic rituals. The other site, Cerro Portezuelo, was established before Teotihuacan really took off, and in contrast, it exhibits only sporadic adoption of Teotihuacan markers for interaction, and the ceramic data there shows that Cerro Portezuelo imported ceramics from all over with no obvious preference shown towards Teotihuacan goods. And the contrast in material records from the 2 sites that are close to each other and close to the capital led scholar Sarah Clayton to suggest a relationship between a site's settlement history and receptivity to foreign influence. The next region has 3 settlements that were investigated. Matacapan, whose reestablishment coincides with Teotihuacan's prime, shows extensive evidence for interaction. Some scholars even suggest that there were Teotihuacanos at the site. There is Tablero architecture on at least 2 structures, and copies of Teotihuacan goods have been found in elite and non-elite contexts, suggesting a wide acceptance. And these include cylindrical tripod vessels, candeleros, floreros, and figurines. And Pachuca source of obsidian is abundant, and there is evidence to suggest that it was a regional distribution center for this resource. And then in contrast, Totocapan and Teotepec were both established long before Teotihuacan, and both sites their architectural styles reflect the local Gulf lowlands style, and neither site in any extensive way incorporated ceramic forms or wares. There's been only one piece of Pachuca obsidian uncovered in Totocapan so far, and the other site, Teotepec, has a fair amount of the Pachuca obsidian that it is believed that it acquired it from Matacapan and not through Teotihuacan directly. Again, there seems to be a contemporary component dictating adoption or rejection of Teotihuacan influence. And the site of Los Horcones in Chiapas is even farther away than the Tuxtlas. There is no evidence for settlement here that predates Teotihuacan. And this is another place where it has been suggested that there were Teotihuacanos living at the site. One of the plazas there, it's called Group F, is laid out in the same way that the Street of the Dead and the Pyramid of the Moon is at Teotihuacan. At both of these sites, the layout is believed to be for ceremonial processions. And ceramic figurines that were found in abundance at the site have iconographic connections to the capital. And even though Los Horcones was importing obsidian from 6 different sources, the Pachuca source comprised the majority of the sample. Here you can see all the sites that I've mentioned so far. The group on the left represents sites that did not fully adopt the suite of markers for Teotihuacan interaction but have established culture histories of their own. And the group on the right were sites that were in the process of developing their cultural histories that absorbed and integrated Teotihuacan materials, and in 2 instances, maybe even Teotihuacanos. So Clayton's idea is likely not applicable to all sites, but within the 3 regions that I've looked at, it does seem to fit. It appears that Teotihuacan selected for sites that were newly established and not already entrenched in their own cultures. And a site's establishment date was more of a factor than the distance it was to the capital in predicting intensity of interaction. So comparative studies such as these neatly bypass some of the limiting factors of archaeological research. And these include things like disparate data sets that are sometimes generated decades apart, especially when you have a long-running research interest and you have things that were published literally 50 years ago compared to things that are published a year ago. So by evaluating data in a relative way, it can still meaningfully contribute. And also I wanted to highlight that half of the Basin of Mexico data was generated without digging. Instead, materials from excavations from the 1950s were re-examined, and these included ceramics, human remains, obsidian, and field reports. And a lot of new conclusions were drawn from this existing material. So future research should not overlook the opportunity to glean fresh information from materials already excavated. And in addition, the continued application of models from other disciplines towards archaeological or research questions can only serve to better our understandings. Thank you for your time. Yep.
Beyond intensity and directionality, could you speculate or speculate for the next project to speculate on the modality of the trade system? That is to say, market.
Okay, so he asked about whether or not I could speculate on modality. Sorry, what was the last bit?
Of exchange, the markets in particular, versus other kinds.
You mean like what's the prime mover behind it? Markets versus something else?
Well, would the distribution be different in the
Oh.
market-based system versus the
I don't know. I don't have anything to speculate on that, to be honest. Yes. With more time. So any other questions? Okay. Hans, right?
Well, I'm just wondering, since your markers included architecture and site layout,
I'm wondering, if you can sort of speculate, actually, what those results would look like, sort of taking those factors out, because you would have, of course, the problem of if what you're seeing is sites that predate Teotihuacan and are showing less marks of interaction with include architecture, that could be a function of the fact that people don't rebuild things sort of every year, right? So, like big like site layouts or like big sort of monuments, they might. So I suppose my question really is, how strongly were these results in terms of not architecture, not site layout?
Well, I think it's important in general to not necessarily weight these categories, because I mean, who are we to say that, you know, whether or not somebody copied somebody's architectural style is more important than whether or not they use the obsidian that came from there? I understand what you're saying, that obviously just because a new style comes out doesn't mean you're going to tear everything down and rebuild it. I think I included it specifically in this case because the apartment compounds that characterized Teotihuacan were new, and to see them replicated somewhere else was evidence that, like, hey, this idea transferred from there to there. These people must have been talking. But yeah, that's all on that. Thanks.
All right. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Kelsey Tilson, and I completed my senior honors thesis under the advisement of Professor Margaret Schrodinger. I want to thank you all for staying. I know this is kind of a long session, and we have really interesting topics, so thank you for hanging around. I am the last one, so we're almost there. Today, I'll be sharing with you my methods and findings of my 2-quarter research project, so let's go ahead and into this. Ever since I was little, I've loved puzzles, and I really believe this is one of the aspects that draws me to anthropology. Because as many of you have probably experienced, anthropological questions are often like 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles that have half of their pieces missing and the cover of the box gone. So our challenge then becomes not only attempting to find the missing pieces, but also to create an effective system of organization for those pieces that we do have, to hopefully give us a glimpse as to what the picture is supposed to look like. So the modern era of anthropology, and particularly archaeology, is presented with this issue of how to integrate classical methods along with new methods now. That does not disregard previous research, but also leaves room for new interpretations and new information to be considered. So while each of both types of methods, both classical and new, are important and they give valuable aspects, the integration is not always used as effectively as it could be. So this leaves research full of gaps, as illustrated by the picture here, that could be filled if we were able to effectively use both types of methods. So to address this issue myself, I chose to examine turkey domestication throughout various sites in the American Southwest that were active primarily from 750 to 1300 AD. I examined 5 sites that were active within this region during this time frame. 2 of these sites had previously published isotope data, and 3 of them underwent isotope analysis for the purposes of this project. So I used a 2-pronged approach to consider the domesticate status of turkeys found at the sites of a foundation of contextual understanding based on previous archaeological excavation reports and published research articles from all 5 of the sites. So some of the information I sought out for each of these things were suggested annual rainfall or climate shifts, social function, population change, subsistence strategies, including the capacity and use of agriculture, as well as the current domestication theories at each of these sites. So this chart is a simplified version of some of the information, but it looks like it's compiled into a single place, so a very simplified version. But based on this information, I was able to reconstruct possible versions of what these sites could have looked like during their prime. So popular theory suggests that these turkeys were regularly and increasingly being domesticated at all of the sites during the period being investigated. And while we are able to interpret a great deal of information from these excavations and archaeological reports, the concrete evidence is still what I consider to be lacking. So in order to fill this gap, I used stable isotope analysis, which is a modern technique used in bioarchaeology to recreate the diet of animals based on organic and both organic and inorganic properties. This analysis uses the naturally occurring isotope of carbon-14 and 13 to identify the type and quantity of plant material consumed by an animal during life. So there's two methods of performing stable isotope analysis, which is bone appetite and bone collagen. This project was to use the bone appetite strategy, as outlined by Professor Schrodinger, based on the amount of material available and the belief that it gives a more average signature over the course of an animal's lifetime when compared to collagen analysis. So something that is really helpful to keep in mind when considering isotope analysis, when you're not super familiar with it, is that the more negative the output ratio is, the more C3 based the signature is, which probably doesn't mean anything to you guys right now, but I'll explain that. So specific types of plants will display a specific type of carbon signature, which can be measured through the trophic levels, meaning the grass is one, and then even when the grass gets eaten, you can measure that as well. So the type of grass an animal consumes can be distinguished between corn and maize, which is generally a C4 plant, versus other wild grasses, which are generally C3 or C3. So this diagram displays this principle through values associated with the white-tailed deer, I'll just highlight that one, and the distinction between the C3 and the C4 grasses. So as you can see, the carbon signature for the deer is much closer to the signature seen in C3 grass than C4, indicating its diet was probably primarily composed of C3 grasses with some possible mixing of C4. So when you translate all those numbers and isotopes into English, a C4 signature is indicative of a maize or corn-based diet, which would suggest domestication, because the feeding patterns that would occur for an animal that is being domesticated would align closely with C4 signature. A C3 or a C3, C4 mixed signature would indicate that it's either non-maize or some type of mixed diet, which gives us a less clear picture of the level of human interaction with their diet, and then should therefore be considered a non-domestic. So based on the contextual evidence that I talked about in the first part of the section, that was gathered from every site, as well as other isotope analyses done in the area, my hypothesis was that the turkeys from all three sites of Cuchiti, Arroyo Hondo, and Pueblo Alto would all display a strong C4 signature, which would be indicative of domestication. I was also fortunate enough to have access to a couple of what I consider control points in the form of fauna, which was a bighorn sheep and a cottontail rabbit, which are animals that are not suggested to have been domesticated based on the research that I had done. So we can consider these what subtype of wild animal would look like in these areas. So a really cool part of this project was that I was not able to a single site, but also various sites within a single system. So in order to effectively compare these findings, we kind of need to orient ourselves as to where they are next to each other. So this is a map of the United States. All of the sites being addressed in this study reside in the American Southwest, so please zoom in on that area. This map displays the 5 sites that I took a look at, each of which were investigated using both traditional archaeological methods and stable isotope analysis. So the sites that have blue markers here, which are Cuchiti, Pueblo Alto, and Arroyo Hondo, indicate sites that I conducted isotope analysis myself for the purposes of this project. The orange markers, seen the sites of Shield, Pueblo, and Homology 3, indicate sites with previously published isotope data that were used as comparisons for the analysis that I did myself. So what did I find after all this? Keeping in mind that the x-axis represents carbon signatures, with the left being the most negative and the right representing the more positive ratios, the results are overwhelmingly a dominant C4 signature. The control samples displayed what can be considered also a relatively high C4 signature, but had clear elements of mixing when compared to the majority of the turkeys. A signature like this could be expected due to the wild types of grass that they were eating, as well as the fact that they were probably scavenging from some of the cornfields in the area. There was also one turkey from Arroyo Hondo, indicated on here by the red triangle, that was around more aligned with the controls rather than the majority of the turkeys. So this could easily have been a wild turkey that was hunted and then brought back to the site afterwards. So interpretations of this graph suggest that turkeys found at nearly every site were eating nothing but corn. To get this high of a signature, it would literally have to be the only thing that they were consuming in their diet. So with the exception of the turkey from Arroyo Hondo. So we can conclude that these turkeys were domesticated on the basis that no wild diet would produce such a high density of C4 plant consumption, as suggested by the controls that we see, which are more associated on the side. So my full thesis contains a discussion where I evaluate these isotopic findings in addition to the archaeological evidence and compare back and forth. But in the interest of time, I'll just focus on one of these sites in particular, which is Pueblo Alto. To me, this was arguably the most interesting of my sites due to the nature of the site in regards to the population size that they had, as well as the suggested function of the site. So Pueblo Alto was inhabited by a very restricted number of individuals when compared to other sites in Chaco Canyon, which is the bigger body of power that Pueblo Alto belongs to. Due to the very little soil moisture in the area, which would immensely limit the capacity for agriculture at that site, as well as the limited number of residential spaces that were found within the construct of the housing there. So Pueblo Alto is also thought to have been used primarily as a trading liaison between downtown Chaco and the greater San Juan Basin. And so turkeys brought into this compound via trade would have required a considerable amount of maize to survive after their arrival. So if corn availability at Pueblo Alto was limited, the people at this location have considered it an investment with maize calories into a turkey in return for meat. We don't know. The study unfortunately can't decipher whether or not they were using these turkeys to eat them, but it was strictly if they were being domesticated. While scientific methods are limited in answering the question at this specific level, to me personally, I believe it's reasonable to suggest that the people of Pueblo Alto would have considered this trade-off with it. So overall, the results of my analysis reinforce pre-existing archaeological, contextual, and data using modern chemical techniques. The findings of this study align with the other studies in the area, which was Schultz, Pueblo, and Hammurabi 3, suggesting at least some consistency throughout the region on a regional level, not necessarily temporal level. And while this data is interesting and important, there were limitations to this study that leaves many questions still unanswered. So what were these turkeys used for? Most of the archaeological research suggests that they were used exclusively for ceremonial practices. However, a re-examination of the site using methods similar to this study, but also having these isotopes on human bone, found that it was very possible and probably likely that people during this time were actively eating domesticated turkeys as well. So while these questions are unable to be addressed fully in this study, it certainly suggests the potential for future research and the possibility for research to contradict the current models that we believe to be correct at this time. So the interplay of both traditional models and modern chemical analysis is valuable. A utilization of both methods should be considered standard practice when possible, as it allows for a more complete historical understanding, or if you will, a more complete puzzle. Studies that allow for studies like this allow for the possibility of new answers to old questions, as in the case of turkey utility in the American Southwest, reopening debates that may have been considered closed before. And so contrary to popular belief, as much as my cohort would love to believe that my presentation is not solely about turkeys. But to me, I find it to be more about the integration of techniques in this nexus that we're at in anthropology, as far as incorporating more than one method and incorporating old methods versus new age methods. So ultimately with the goal of illuminating a history that we couldn't see before. So thank you for your attention today, and I would be happy to take your questions.
I'm curious, when is the earliest release of the date for turkeys in the Southwest? My understanding is that they were Mesoamerican
Mm-hmm. I can't remember the specific data right off the top of my head, but I did read one of the articles that used mitochondrial DNA actually to show that the turkeys that are in the American Southwest do not have, according to the ones that they were looking at, don't have a lineage in Mesoamerica. So the turkeys that were domesticated in the American Southwest were domesticated in the American Southwest. As far as my project goes, the earliest date that I could configure safely was around 1080. But I think it's pretty likely that they would have been around for that as well. I'm sure there's immense literature written on that. I'm sure my mentor has probably touched on that a couple of times in some way, one way or another. For the purposes of this study, I didn't focus too much on that because I didn't have access to human remains to be able to do that scope analysis on them. I would definitely consider it one of a future endeavor if I ever were able to come across it, but for the purposes of the study, I was limited to just the surveys. Any other questions?
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone again. I am Professor Caterina Semendeferi. I'm a biological anthropologist in the department and also the director of undergraduate studies. Congratulations, you guys. You did fantastic. So this is going to be the second and very brief part of the event today. It's going to be about acknowledging student achievement and congratulating excellence in our undergraduate student body. Okay, so in our department, we give honors to outstanding students who are in the honors program. And this is what I want to do next, to congratulate and acknowledge those of you who are getting honors in the department. This is a long tradition. What is new for this year is the fact that for the first time, the 2015 graduates honors, they decided that they have our own court of honors, and they chose the colors to symbolize the three majors in biological, archaeological, and sociocultural anthropology. And so I'm going to be calling for your names, you guys, and I'm going to give you the courts and your certificates, one after the other. In a random order, really, I try to mix the colors to represent the different majors. So it's not in particular order. So let me start with Hans Hobart, please. Okay, let me tell you a couple of things about Hans. So Hans is a double major in anthropology and political science. And not only is he a double major, but he actually wrote 2 honors theses. He's graduating summa cum laude from Warren College. And he is contemplating on whether he's going to accept the offer to do postgraduate work in social anthropology at Cambridge or international relations at Oxford. So, good luck with that decision. Hans presented at the Claremont UC Undergraduate Research Conference, and he was awarded the top conference prize and selected for publication in 2014 conference issue. Hans also was funded with a studentship to EU institutions for 2 weeks in the summer of 2014 in the Center of Excellence in Brussels. So with that, I would like to congratulate Hans. Be the court. Now, how should we do this? Do we do this? Yes. All right. So the next color is the yellow one for Vanessa Monson. And let me tell you a couple of things about Vanessa. Vanessa did participate in the undergraduate research conference at UCSD, along with every other presenter in this group today. And she decided to do graduate school and go to Colorado University in Boulder in the fall to pursue a master's in anthropology. Okay, our next student is Cindy Bowie. Hi, Cindy. Okay, Cindy is a another honor student who worked with us in the fall and the winter quarter. So even though she did not present today, she has done an exceptional thesis and has been busy with all kinds of things, including she directed Eyes on the Elderly, and she plans to contribute to the effort of improving UCSD's aging culture on campus. She was an active member of Alternative Breaks for 2 years, volunteered with disaster relief and education inequalities. She received the Gilman Scholarship to study in Vietnam this summer, first time going and learning about her personal roots. She is a Marshall Honors student, and she is a Chancellor Scholar. Congratulations, Cindy. No, please don't laugh. Okay. Kelsey Telson. So Kelsey is a McNair Scholars student. She volunteered for the summer and the fall quarter at the UCSD Paleo Diet Lab under Professor Margaret and Andrew Somerville. And she's going to be going to Delphi in Greece this summer to do a digital archaeology field school with Dr. Lee. Am I forgetting anything? I don't think so. No. And I know she's contemplating to apply to graduate school in the near future. So congratulations, Kelsey. Okay. Okay, so Jared, he is a Marshall College, he's part of the Marshall College Honors Program. He presented at the Faculty Mentorship Program Symposium. He presented his research at the Horizons of Global Health Symposium. He's an officer in the Anthropology Club. He's an officer for the Gun Violence Intervention Group of UCSD. He's accepted to the Clinton Global Initiative University and invited to and attended annual conference at the University of Miami. He's a senior member of the Global Health Student Advisory Committee. Intern and volunteer at Health Frontiers in Tijuana, a student-run free medical clinic for vulnerable populations of Tijuana. He is a research assistant in the Department of Anthropology. He is an incorporating board member of registered 5013C nonprofit local theater company, Circle, ...
Plug.
Currently in residence at the La Jolla Playhouse. And in the fall, Jared is going to be pursuing a master's in public health from Columbia University in the Department of Social Medical Sciences, concentrating in global health. Congratulations, Jared. Okay, Sarah Mates. So Sarah has been part of the Faculty Mentor Program. She volunteered in the Levantine Archaeology Lab in our department. She is the president of the Anthropology Club, yay! And she will consider graduate school in the near future. Congratulations, Sarah. Megan McElroy. Megan is a McNair scholar. She did research for that program, and she presented findings of her research at the UCSD Summer Research Conference and at UC Berkeley McNair Scholarship Conference in 2014. She has been this year, 2014-15, a communications correspondent for the McNair Scholars Journal organization. She studied abroad in 2014 in Queen's Mary University and University of College London, where she was very active in the Anthropological Society and their journal. She's a recipient of a study abroad grant and from Friends of the International Center here. She is in the Dean's List of Honors for all quarters at PCSD. Megan decided to attend the University of Chicago and do a master's degree in social science with a concentration in cultural and psychological anthropology. And she plans to enroll in a PhD program after completing her master's degree in the field of anthropology. Congratulations. Cheyenne Rose is another student in our honors group. She's not here right now. Vanessa Serros, I know she graduated already in the winter, so she's not going to be present. And Kimberly Panion, she graduated also earlier this year. But I want to extend my congratulations to all of you guys if you're watching. Okay, so in addition to giving departmental honors, we have a tradition in our department, long-standing tradition, to give 3 awards. 1 award in each of our 3 majors. So 1 for a biological anthropology student, 1 for an archaeology student, and 1 for a social culture student. I would like to start with the biological award. It's the Sherwood Washburn Award for Excellence in Biological Anthropology. We have a long list of past recipients of the award, starting back in 1996. And I would like to announce this year's award. Kelsey. So Kelsey, this is the framed certificate of excellence for you. This is something that you need to return to us upstairs. Well, it's only just to show off how well prepared we are to celebrate today. It's a plaque, so we are adding the names of the awarded students in this plaque, and we have the plaque upstairs in the Spiral Library room. So please take it with you upstairs when we go for the reception. And this is a symbolic gift for the bookstore. Congratulations. The second award is an award in archaeology, the Robert McAdams Award for Excellence in Archaeology. It's an award that we have been giving in the department again for years, going back to 1995. And this year's award goes to Gabriela De La Torre. So let me tell you a few things about Gabriela. So Gabriela joined UCSD in 2013. Can you come a little closer? I'm sure that we can see the light. So Gabriela, her first quarter here at UCSD, she began volunteering in archaeology labs, in Paul Goldstein's labs, and in Tom Levy's labs. She's telling me that she put more than 450 hours of work over these last 2 years. The summer of 2014, she completed a field school program in Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania with the Olduvai Geochronology and Archaeology Project. Then she began research through the faculty mentor program with Professor Tom Levy during winter quarter of 2015. In February, she was hired by the California Institute for Telecommunications and Information Technology, LIT, to work alongside a team of computer science students to help design an online database, ArchaeoStore, for which to store lithic data in. Outside of the classroom, she tells me that she has been holding part-time jobs since her sophomore year of college. And she's currently working anywhere between 20 to 30 hours a week at the retail store at UTC Mall. So, come and visit you. This upcoming summer, she will be participating as a volunteer at an archaeological dig in Israel under the direction of Dr. Leo Grossman at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She will be taking a year off after finishing her undergraduate degree and applying to graduate school. During her year off, she will continue to work with Professor Levy to conduct further and in-depth lithic research of the remainder of the collection from the site in Jordan. Congratulations, Gabriela. This is the spot. And that's for you in the bookstore. The Irwin Hallowell Award for Excellence in Sociocultural Anthropology goes back to 1985 in our department. And this year's award goes to Carlos Hansford. All right. This is my favorite part of the event. And not this, but this whole second part. Okay. We have more memorable mentions to make before we conclude. We have a nice list of outstanding students who will receive Latin honors upon graduation. The names are up there. I will not take time to go individually over your colleagues, but I wanted to be there for you to see. We have, of course, the McNair Scholars. It's a very special program on campus that supports outstanding students, some of which you already met today. Cheyenne Butcher, who is not here, but she is awarded the honors in the department, and she has been part of the program. Kelsey Telson and Megan McAvoy. Congratulations to all of you for being part of the program. We had several students participate in the undergraduate research conference this year. It was a fun event. I'm very proud of all of you. So congratulations for that. In the faculty mentor program, we have the students listed there and one more that it was my oversight. So we have Sarah Mays, Gabriela De La Torre, and Jared Ekengren. I'm sorry, Jared, for missing your name there, but all of them were out of the faculty mentor program. So congratulations for that. Another exciting thing that we started doing last year is the Ambassadors of Anthropology. So the Ambassadors of Anthropology this year, in 2015, are the people who presented to you today. And the idea behind this initiative is to really, for us, for the students, to share their excitement about anthropology and share with the world the fascinating research that is being done specifically in our department. So we are doing this through outreach events, both outside campus and on campus. This year, our ambassadors, Gerald, Anne, Sarah, Megan, Vanessa, and Kelsey. We went to Mira Costa Community College for an outreach event, as you can see on the right. The ambassadors participated in Triton Day and Transfer Day at UCSD this spring. And we have some more outreach events to do that are coming up. So, and of course, the students for all the hard work that they're doing, what they're getting for this is this lovely, amazing picture that they themselves designed. So it's a lot of work for a t-shirt, but it's the symbol that matters, I suppose. So I really personally want to thank you. You put a lot of time into this, and I'm very proud of what you're doing and how inspiring you are to others. All right, so this brings me to something else, even more personal. There is another award that my laboratory gives, the Lisa Stefanacci Award for Excellence in Human Comparative Neuroanatomy. This is an award that I started giving last year. It is to honor Lisa. Dr. Stefanacci received her PhD from the neuroscience program at UCSD. Her research interests included emotional regulation, social cognition, and primate limbic system as reflected in her scientific publications. In 2011-2013, Lisa joined the laboratory of human comparative neuroanatomy as a project scientist in a multidisciplinary collaboration on human social cognition and Williams syndrome. Dr. Stefanacci was a fierce advocate for women in science, and over the years mentored generously students in anthropology and beyond. The award in her name intends to honor her memory in light of all which characterized her: personal integrity and excellence in scientific inquiry, practice, and ethics. Last year's recipient of the award was Chelsea Brown, who was trained by Lisa in my laboratory. And I need to, it doesn't let me click.
Everyone, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Chelsea. I graduated from the honors program last year with degrees in physiology, neuroscience, and biological anthropology. And now I'm at UC Santa Barbara in their neuroscience and behavior PhD program, which I'm really enjoying so far. To all the upcoming grads, I'd like to say congratulations on the celebration of all your hard work and enjoy the rest of your college experience. I really wish I could be there to see your presentations, but I'm still in school also, so I couldn't make it down. I'm sure that they're going really well. I'm also excited to announce the Lisa Stefanacci Award for Excellence in Comparative Neuroanatomy. I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Lisa Stefanacci, who is both a great scientist and an amazing person, and I'm a better scientist in person for having known and learned with her. The recipients of the award this year are two wonderful students who I have the pleasure of training. Congratulations to Val Judd and Haley Orphan.
Ladies want to join me? I want to share some things about Haley and Val with everyone. So they both joined my laboratory last spring as volunteers and were trained initially in basic laboratory operations. They became involved in more complex techniques and were integrated in ongoing research projects. Last fall, they were hired to work as paid RAs to assist graduate students with their dissertation projects. We invited them to co-author conference presentations led by graduate students Harry Hanson and Caroline Horton in the Society for Neuroscience and the American Association for Physical Anthropology. Because of their outstanding skills and dedication, they were nominated in a grant application to a campus-wide research competition, the Frontiers of Innovation Scholars Program, to perform cutting-edge interdisciplinary research that aims to explore the neural substrates of human knowledge, learning, and creativity, led by graduate student Franca Horvanikic. Val and Haley received the scholarship that will be used over the summer to support them. Over the summer, they were invited to participate in activities of the UCSD Summer Research Program. Frontiers students in San Diego will be invited to attend such activities of the program as seminars on ethical research, workshops on choosing the right graduate program, effective oral presentations, writing a research proposal, and other activities. These events will give them a chance to meet their peers who are also conducting research at UC San Diego during the summer. We also Know that the students will be invited to present their findings at the annual Summer Research Conference on August 13th. Each year, the Academic Enrichment Program invites undergraduates conducting research at UCSD, San Diego State, USD, Cal State San Marcos, and other institutions to present their findings in an all-day conference, similar in format to what we experienced at the undergraduate research conference here at UCSD. Both Val and Haley plan to apply to graduate school in the fall to continue the study of human evolution. I would like to congratulate both of you. Thank you. This is from my laboratory. Congrats, guys. Before I move to the next slide, I have to say that Anthony, congratulations for graduating from high school, and congratulations for going to Columbia University. Lisa would have been very proud of you. We are very proud of you. Okay, so the very last few minutes I want to spend on going back to my class of last year. And I don't know, some of you may remember the presentations here and see where are they now, okay? So Tim, he is starting graduate school in landscape architecture at Cal Poly in Pomona next fall. Chelsea, we heard from her just a few minutes ago. She is in the PhD program in neuroscience and behavior at UC Santa Barbara. Aliyah Hoff, she is in graduate school in anthropology at Arizona State University. And just received an NSF. And she also just missed her plane. She was on her way to come here, and there was a delay. So maybe she's going to be able to join us at the reception. Lindsay, she's about to finish actually her master's of public health at Emory University. Jessica, she is in graduate school in social work in Loma Linda starting next fall. And Nicholas, he is traveling the world working and applying to graduate programs. And I do have a little clip from Jessica.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jess, if you don't know me already. I graduated in June of 2014 with a degree in sociocultural anthropology. Then I took a gap year off, and I'll be starting my master's in social work at the Loma Linda University in the fall. So I just wanted to say hello to all the wonderful professors and lecturers that helped me along the way. You helped me so much during college, and I continue to use the things that you learned me today in the real world. So thank you for everything. Special shout out to Katarina and Professor Brenner for helping me so much on my thesis and just life in general. And to all the seniors, I just want to say congratulations. And if you did the honors thesis program, way to go. I know it was hard, but you did it, and I'm sure you rocked it. But to all the seniors in general, just congrats. I know it's hard, and you're just going to push through the finish like we know you will, and it's going to be great. And even if you don't know exactly what you're going to do when you graduate, it's okay. Most of us didn't, and we had to take gap years, and that's okay. You might not end up going the anthropology route, and it's no big deal. I'm sure you're going to do great things, and no matter what, you'll use the knowledge that you were given at UCSD. So keep going, push to the finish, and enjoy the rest of your year. And again, congratulations, and hello to everyone. Have a good summer. Bye.
And we have one more from last year's honor class, from Nick Johnson.
Hello, class of 2015. I'm Nick Johnson. I was in the honors program last year and graduated with degrees in anthropology and history. I first want to say congratulations to you all. This is a really great time to take a second and celebrate your accomplishments and all your hard work, as well as share your research and all the work you've done leading up to this moment. As for me, since graduating, I got a job as a recruiter up in my hometown of San Jose, working for a startup company, and I've been doing a lot of traveling and backpacking to Latin America. And coming from here now, I'm going to be applying to PhD programs this fall, and then going on to grad school to study sociocultural anthropology some more. And yeah, I want to say I'm really excited that I got to be present in some sort of virtual capacity. Thanks, Professor Samantha for that. And yeah, I hope you all have a great time in graduation and the summer.
All right. The last little video clip is from one of the honor students from the year before, Tatiana Duran, who is also with us today, but I want to play your clip, Tatiana, because it was so lovely. So it's only 2 seconds.
Hi everyone, I'm Tatiana. I was a student there in 2013 when I did my honors thesis. And today I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Thanks to that, I was actually accepted into the PhD program in Anthropology at UCSD, and I'm actually going to be working with my advisor during my honors thesis. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I had a wonderful time. I congratulate all of you on having this wonderful opportunity. Really cherish the relationship that you're going to be developing with your advisor and the opportunity that you have to have something to showcase, when you're out and about. So I'll leave you here, and I think I'm going to be seeing you this Monday. Bye.
Okay, and this takes us to the future. We have a group of students that we invited for next year's program, and I hope that many of them will be in your place next year presenting exciting work. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I would like to acknowledge several people in the department, all the faculty who participated and supported the program in the 3 majors, in the bioarchaeology and cultural majors. I'd like to extend thanks to Professor Goldstein, who is the former director of undergraduate studies and who is always there to provide me with advice and wisdom, and several of our colleagues at the staff, Christy, Jenny, and Norma. Special thanks go out to Kathy Greeley, our amazing librarian. The group could not have been able to do the quality of research they did without her help. She epitomizes to me what UCSD is all about. She's always available and willing to help. And of course, Janelle and Carlos, for your amazing help. We would not have been able to put it together without you. So thank you, and special thanks to the alumni. We started reaching out to our alumni. We have some of you here today. Would you mind raising your hand, those of you who are alumni? Well, thank you so much for coming. I've received several emails from alumni, and we're planning to do something in the near future with gathering information, hellos, and anything else that alumni are willing to share. So please stay tuned on that. And with that, I would like to conclude today's event and invite everyone to the reception upstairs. So let's have some food and drinks and celebrate.
Well, let's not conclude just yet. We still have one more order of business to attend. And that is giving credit where credit is very much due. Our Director of Undergraduate Studies, Professor Katerina Samantha-Ferry, who has not only worked so hard to help us create coherent theses we can be proud of, but also work tirelessly, and I speak on behalf of all of us, to create such an enriching program that we all had such a great time doing. It was really meant a lot to us. So I think I speak on behalf of all of us to extend our deepest gratitude to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, you guys. Thank you. Okay, thank you everyone. Let's go upstairs and celebrate. Thank you.